Last year, I was living in a very rural town in the middle of the mountains. Most small western towns only have one road that goes into the big city. Our road in particular was about 50 miles of empty highway, surrounded only by cliffs, fields, and occasionally a farm. At the very entrance to this road once you enter the city is a huge truck stop, kind of gas station that's always packed. My mom and I were going back home after a midnight showing of whatever movie we had decided to see, and as per usual, we stopped to fill up on gas and get a drink for the long drive. As we were leaving, I vaguely noticed a dingy older Jeep pull out the same time that we did, but of course, I didn't take much notice of it. It wasn't weird that somebody would be leaving the same time as us. As we started down the pitch-black road, the Jeep kept a steady pace behind us. Again, not weird, until it came flying up past us before disappearing behind a hill. Mom and I just scoffed. We were going 60, but when people knew the roads well, they often drove them at close to 100, even during the night. Eventually, we came up to the Jeep from before. It was pulled over, but the back half of the vehicle was in the road, and what was clearly a man's arm was waving out the window, gesturing for us to pull over. Of course, we pass it. The man flies past us once more and pulls over again. He does this once more and my mom and I begin to get very nervous. After passing him for the third time, he flies up and begins tailgating us. He's driving so close that we can't see his headlights in the rearview mirror, and he's honking his horn every so often, waving his arm for us to pull over. He carries on with this for about 30 minutes. Mom and I are terrified. She's white-knuckling the wheel, and I'm holding a pocket knife to make myself feel better. I swore at my own mother for the first time that night, begging her, "Don't you dare pull over." If you've ever seen the movie Rest Stop, that is all that was going through my mind. The road is a dead zone for service, so we couldn't call the police or anyone. The picture of us, dead or worse, on the side of the empty road was the only thing that I could think about. But as soon as it had started, it had ended. The man slammed on his brakes, turned around, and went back. The ride home was silent, and I ended up sleeping in my mom's room out of fear. The next morning, we had a discussion and came to the conclusion that he had seen two lone women traveling at night and thought we would be easy pickings, which he would have been right. Some people suggest that he had seen us drop money or a receipt at the gas station and wanted to be a good Samaritan. I think that's ridiculous. Nobody following two women home in such an aggressive manner had good intentions. We moved out of town a few months later for unrelated reasons, but just before we did, the same car was reported following a group of 4 men on their way to work. So maybe he just liked to scare people. Either way, that night was easily one of the scariest of my life. This happened about a month ago. For a bit of background, me and my cousin and my brother took classes over the summer at a local college. Me and my cousin took a biology class while my brother took a pre-calculus class. My brother's class ends later than our class, giving us a 2-hour window where we would sit around the college to wait for him. The drive was back and forth about an hour or so. We would wait to conserve gas. During the encounter, we were waiting for him at the cafeteria passing time. After a while, this woman in a wheelchair showed up in front of some vending machines a couple of feet in front of us. I paid it no mind, but she sat in front of that vending machine for 15 minutes and started to play loud music. It startled me, so I looked up at her. She then looked at us and asked, "Do any of you boys have 10 cents that I can use for the vending machine?" I had 2 $5 bills in my pocket in case I needed some food, so I gave her a 5 and got handed back my change. And then she asked for another favor. This time it was to bring her to a parking lot near the football stadium where her ride would be waiting. She said that she had never been there and needed some guidance. I figured there was no harm in helping her, so I took the handles, but she immediately stopped me and asked for my cousin instead. I was being pretty oblivious during this entire encounter, so I didn't even realize how strange that request was, and I didn't notice many of the strange things she did until later. And I also want to clarify that she was able to move on her own just fine, so the request for a push at all was strange too. And as my cousin was pushing her, she kept looking back at me and giving an uncanny smile. Like it was meant to be a friendly smile, but it came off more like she had some sort of malicious intent. After we arrived, she looks at us and asks, "Could you two stay with me until my ride comes?" Still giving us the smile, but we reluctantly agreed. You know, once I had to go back and forth from here in the other parking lot, it was so annoying, she recalled as we wait. Me and my cousin shuffled at this because we found this extremely unsettling. This was because it meant she had lied to us about not knowing where she was going. Even stranger, she tells me about how she loves to smash glass bottles to tame her anger, like the glass bottles that she had in her hands at that moment. I hadn't caught on to the strangeness yet, but my cousin was unnerved. He was trying to discreetly point out that no cameras were around to me, and that not many people were around, but I didn't catch any of it. At some points while we were waiting, this one car would keep circling the parking lot too. We asked if it was her ride, but she told us that her ride was a van. At that time, our ride came, so we apologized and left. We've told many other people about this story, and they all agree that she was acting pretty strange. Later I realized how it seemed like she was trying too hard to be friendly, how anxious she seemed, and how many of the things she said didn't match up and seemed off. The main thing that fueled me seeing this as odd was the fact that according to my cousin and his sibling, me and my brother's other cousin, there was an email sent out warning people about a potential human trafficking scheme caught on campus. I couldn't confirm the validity of it because me and my brother aren't actually enrolled into the school, and therefore don't get messages about anything going on around campus. And my cousin has been known to play stupid jokes like that. But nevertheless, it caused me to relook what happened through that lens. But what do you all think? Do you think that I'm just being paranoid, or did she actually have bad intentions? I want to start off saying all these years later that I can look back and understand now what was going on. And I scold my younger self for not taking action quicker, or stopping it right after it started. However, I will defend my young 20-year-old self by saying that I grew up socially sheltered, and was a late bloomer to a lot of things. Friends, parties, drinking weed, an actual, not strictly AOL-IM romantic relationship, so on. So at the age of 16, I started as an apprentice to a certain not very common trade of skill. In the almost 20 years since then, I've worked pretty much all over the area, but there were several places where I worked for a long time. Also to notice that 95% of my day was working in the back of the shop. But because there was the rare time that I did have to go and speak with paying customers, I didn't dress like a slob, more formal casual. Now this field is mostly male-dominated, so I've had my fair share of bad men having no problem telling me this wasn't a woman's place, and they didn't try and hide their locker room talk. However, the worst of the worst was a man named Curtis. I was young, 20, and very naive. On the first day of work after being hired and upon meeting him, he made a point to tell me how he always spoke his mind, and most people didn't like him because of that. So he gets at least points for that. I quickly learned he liked to talk, I mean a lot. And it also didn't take too horribly long to realize that he probably wasn't telling the truth. He spoke several languages, including his wife's native language, who by the way he had saved from her terrible poverty home country, and was also pregnant with his 5 children. But according to him, the highlights of his life that led him here were: he started off as a police officer of a somewhat nearby town, and the day that he saw a man beaten to death in his cell by other officers was the day that he decided to quit. So he went to work as an English professor at a somewhat near and well-known university. There he wrote his novel, My Life as an Insert Name Police Officer. And now he only somewhat teaches, but mostly he's transitioned his life to this line of work. All of that was unsettling and a little annoying enough, but throw in the inappropriate questions such as, how are your bowel movements? Yeah, that was an actual question he had asked me out of the blue one morning. When I replied that wasn't truly a line of questions, I thought 2 coworkers, a manager and an associate manager to be accurate, to have, he very defensively assured me there was nothing wrong talking about the biological body as long as you used scientific words. So here's where it got really bad, and where I think he might have been a predator that had started to or was trying to groom me. I'd only been working there and with him a few months when he made it a point to tell me that I could be a really pretty woman if I cared about my style of dress and how I did my makeup. Keep in mind, it didn't matter that I hardly worked with customers. It was the professional thing that a woman in the workplace needed to do. I felt uncomfortable and embarrassed all at once. In my mind, he was basically telling me how ugly I was, and I later found out he was telling everyone who would listen that I was too fat for this line of work, and if it had been up to him, he wouldn't have bothered hiring me. The catch was he offered to take me shopping, and he would fit the bill on everything. This still made me uncomfortable, but in my young mind, he was superior and he was offering to pay for everything. I was a college, degreeless 20-year-old kid living in a really crappy apartment, living paycheck to paycheck. It hardly seemed like I was in the place to turn it down. So he took me shopping. He picked out a bunch of skirt 3-piece suits for me. Waiting outside while I changed, and he showed him for his approval. Then he took me to a very expensive designer makeup store, where he directed the girls there on which makeup to use, basically giving me a makeup right there, and then buying all the makeup that had been used on me. If this wasn't bordering on inappropriate, after all this was done and purchased, he took photos of me, so as he said, I could see and understand the difference in the before and after. That's about as creepy as it got. We worked for about another 6 months together before I got sick of him and all of his lies and leers, and every time we worked together, he made sure to critique my wardrobe and how I had done my makeup and hair that day. I decided to do the bare minimum of sleuthing to find that he never was a police officer for said town, and currently wasn't nor ever was teaching at the university where he said he did. I wrote a long letter to my boss's boss, detailing all of his lies and what he thought were appropriate topics of work conversation. He was transferred to another location soon after that, but it didn't stop there. Nearly on a weekly basis, he would call and ask or tell me that he needed me to come to his location because someone had called off of work, or he was overwhelmed and he needed help. I would always say no, and he would always back it up, saying that he would pay me extra for my time. Luckily, within the year, I didn't work there anymore, and I've never had to deal with him since. So even though I've got other stories of crap I've had to take from men in the workplace, he was by far the worst. And I wonder how bad it could have gotten if I really had wanted his time, attention, or even praise from an older man. How very different it all could have turned out. One summer long ago, I worked for a house painting company made of many small franchises preying on college students for underpaid and overworked employees. Said indentured servants or workforce generally returned to school in late August, and the franchise would close until the next summer. I was a lackey who hired everyone, formed crews, met with customers, transported materials, etc., aka my boss's job, but he preferred, not doing it. Late in the summer, my boss decided to continue into the fall months so he could make more money, while depriving me even further of the will to live. So I had to hire people who were in the painting business, but for whatever reason couldn't find a job with a reputable company, and so they had no option but to work with us. Hooray. Enter Jim. Jim was a veteran about 45 years old, which was far above my usual 18 to 22 hiring demographic. But he had impressed me over the phone, so what the heck. As I was essentially painting entire houses myself, or with a skeleton crew until I could scrounge up more workers, I didn't interview him in person. Just told him to show up ready to go in to meet me and a crew at a new job site at 9 a.m. on Monday. Life happens as it does, and I had a family emergency that prohibited me from being there on Monday. Some of my summer workers who didn't go off to school would be there, so I texted them explaining to help Jim get used to the way that we worked, and to make sure just to keep it basic. If he was having trouble, just send him home and he would start over with me there the next day. 9:45 a.m. My phone is blown up with texts and calls. I'm not awake, but I slip outside to hiss into the phone. I'm staring at a dead family member, and you know this, and now what? Jim isn't okay. What do you mean? Well, he's freaking insane. He's ruining this person's roof and he won't listen to us. He keeps screaming at us to shut up. Well, I thought Jim had a point with the last part since my crew spent more time talking than painting, but I digress. In their infinite wisdom, my crew stuck this new dude up on the roof to paint a teeny space, which would only take about 5 minutes with a brush. Homeboy pulls out a 9-inch roller and goes to town, swooping the thing up and down like a skateboarder on a half pipe, so the entire black roof area below him is covered in beige paint. I tell them to get him down and to send him home, and I'll deal with it after the wake. I tell my boss what's going on. He brushes it off, saying that Jim called him to apologize and to tell him that he could bring his cousin Oscar, a guy who's apparently worked as a painter in a union, to the next job. Boss doesn't consult me, says it's fine, and I have to deal with it. Great. New job site, new day, and I still hate my life. Oscar isn't in a union, but he did work as a painter for over a decade, until he was put in jail for armed robbery, a jail stint that he was fresh out of as of a week ago. Now to Oscar's credit, he was very polite, respectful, and deferent. Yes, bow before me. I'd asked to speak to him alone before I let him set foot on my job site, and he was completely upfront about his jail time and what led to it, answering any questions that I had. I was convinced, and he did an excellent job. My boss stopped by for the first time in forever, and was also impressed by Oscar. So impressed that he decided Oscar and Jim would take on a job by themselves, a job that was mostly trim work for a family of a mom, pop, and 3 daughters, 15, 11, and 7. He also decided that he would take care of all the customer interaction, with the exception of me dropping off the extra tall ladder halfway through to reach one ridiculously small but very high piece. Sure, fine. Halfway through the job, about 2 days in, I show up like a good peon, massive ladder in tow. Jim is listening to music, and I see Oscar furtively look at him and then wave to me to keep driving and park around the corner. I love me some drama. I don't care about anything anymore, so I do what he says. Oscar sprints to my car and tells me that Jim has been making the owners and their daughters very uncomfortable, and my boss has been ignoring their phone calls. Oscar had told them privately to wait until the day I came and he would make sure that I talked to them. I thanked Oscar and told him that I would deal with it right then, and requested that he hang around and proceed as if anything is fine, in case I need his assistance in any capacity. I pulled into the driveway, nodded at Jim, and knocked on the door. I was pulled in almost immediately by a frantic and a hot mother. The family was rushed, and so I was treated to a deluge of information that I could mostly understand, but the rest was rather confusing. Apparently Jim had been very opportunistic about his ladder position as he worked on the second floor of the house, and they were conveniently always able to see directly into the girls' bedrooms, which he took pictures of on his phone. He also made multiple comments to the girls as they came home from school that were a sizable step over the line, but a freaking football field past the line of how you speak to a customer or their kids, period. Massively inappropriate. I managed to keep myself from melting into the floor, and I promised them that this will be dealt with immediately. And with that, I walk out to confront Jim. I asked if I can use his phone because mine was dead, and he handed it over. I find almost 100 pictures of the various bedrooms from every angle possible, zoomed in, etc. He sees me open the pictures from his position on the ladder and starts flying down and screaming at me. Me launches at me, and Oscar puts himself in between us, yelling at Jim to calm down. Jim panics and flees for his car, leaving his phone with me. The police were called, and I handed the phone over. I was interviewed. Poor Oscar almost had a panic attack, but they said they would work with the family and take it from there. Great. I finished the job with Oscar. We get tipped, and the family thanked us for our role in helping them, as they really didn't know how to handle what Jim was doing. Time passes, and I'm home watching TV in the living room. It's about 9 p.m. Light floods the room as a car pulls up my neighbor's driveway with its brights on. I don't care, I continue watching TV. A few minutes pass, and I hear yelling from my neighbor's house. I look out the window, and it's Jim's car in their driveway, because my boss had given him my home address as were to pick up the checks at the end of each week. He got confrontational, yelling at the neighbors where I was, when really all he had to do was turn around to see my idiotic, slack-jawed face staring at the window about 6 feet away. And then he pulled out a handgun and started motioning at the wife. Before I could even register that this was actually happening, I grabbed my own gun, which I would have heroically used to use on myself in the foot or something. My living room is filled with red and blue lights as multiple cop cars pull up and consequently arrest Jim. Jim had 4 guns in the passenger seat of his car. He apparently had only taken one out to wave it over his head, leaving the other 3 in the car because he wasn't 100% sure which house was mine. Now my neighbors are elderly, nosy, snarky, and call the cops on any and everything of little to no consequence. They called as soon as his beater car pulled up in their driveway, and their knee-jerk 911 reaction likely saved my life.